So the idea here is maybe we'll spend about 30 minutes at most, just sort of talking about the film. And I guess one thing, Steve, just to start off, you know, this film, of course, presents a dramatized version of the sorts of things that men and women who are serving do, in the Navy SEALs do. What do you think, though, the general public should take away from this film, and sort of the role Navy SEALs play and the special operators play?
First, just to acknowledge what Robert's talked about, that, you know, normally one team would not do all of these missions, you know, in sequence like that. That's a little bit of a stretch. They obviously didn't want to put that many more of those young men into the acting business, but it take it away as an example of the kind of missions that the special operators, in this case particularly the SEALs, are capable of doing, the kind of equipment they use, the kind of interaction that they go through to do these missions. So, yeah, I've heard a lot of criticism of the movie of, well, you know, it's unrealistic. Okay, it's a movie. You know, normally they have actors doing all that stuff. These were actual Navy SEALs doing what they do. I did read a thing where the guys filming that one scene when the boats pull up and kind of light those bad guys up. The cameramen were all excited about it until they explained to them that a lot of that stuff was filmed with live ammo. because I got to tell you, in special ops, they use live ammo for training. I learned that as a young lieutenant. The first training mission I did with the first team I was on, we were out at a range and we did an immediate action drill, you call it, where you pretend there's bad guys out there and you sort of disengage. And I was sitting there setting up a live claymore mine, which shoots little metal beads like those vests were going to shoot, and with our good guys out in front of us shooting live ammo, and then they pulled back behind us and were shooting sort of around and over me while I set this thing up, and then we set it off. And I had come from a regular Army unit at that point, and I said, God, the range control people see us doing this, we're all going to go to jail. And but that's the way you train, because you can't do it for real if you've never done it in practice. And it's different with real bullets and real explosives than it is with practice stuff. But just a couple of quick things that I think you should take away from this, those of you that have never been in the military. One is the family and camaraderie part. That seems a little, you know, sentimental and everything. That's real, all right? That's real. The teams that I was on and the teams that I led, the wives of the team members are like sisters to the guys. Their kids, you know, you're like aunts and uncles. I've done funerals for my guys. And when you see the emotion that's there, not just from the actual families that have lost the individuals, but from everybody, it's real. So that depiction, particularly at the beginning, was very, very accurate, very true. Talking to my wife about her reaction when I would deploy, that young lady, as she said goodbye to the lieutenant, and they're brave, and they stand there, and they give their support to their spouse as they deploy, and then they live with the difficulty afterwards, in some case the extreme difficulty. The second thing is the kind of brotherhood thing, you know, the bromance thing going on there. All right, that's real too, guys. You're talking about putting your life on the line for these people you're with. They're not just business colleagues. All right, you can't do these kind of missions if that's all you've got. And so that's very real, very accurate, and it's what motivates guys and gals in the military. It's not patriotism. It's not, you know, loyalty to the flag or rock hard discipline to your superiors. It's trying to protect those guys or gals on your left and right when you're out there, because you know they're thinking the same thing about you. And then the last part of it is the fact that war is a really crappy, dangerous business. You know, it isn't like glory and flags flying and all that stuff. You know, all the stuff you see in the movies in the old days of that, it wasn't like that back then either. It is definitely not like that now. It's ugly, it's dirty. The bad guys depicted here, they're out there, all right? They're trying to find, you know, the good gelatin stuff with the ceramic balls and that kind of ideas. They're working hard. Some of them do it for money, some of them do it for ideology, some of them do it for a combination thereof, but they're out there and they're trying to hurt us. The war isn't over, and that's not a political statement. That's a fact. And thank God we still have young men and women who are willing to put on the uniform of this country and continue to do those really hard things. And to be honest, you know, this has been in the press a lot about the SEALs. Have been getting a lot of stuff because of the book coming out and, you know, the Bin Laden raid, hoop-doo, and who's telling what to whom. Most of the special ops community are known as quiet professionals. And they really, really prefer to not get any darn recognition at all, other than from each other. Occasionally you get stuff that comes out, you know, these are the guys that deserve parades and appearances in the White House. And they don't get that, they don't want that. They want to do their job, they want to do it well, and at the end of the day, they want to look around and see the same guys with them that they started the day with. They are the elite professionals of our military, but I got to tell you, they're not supermen. They are regular men, in some cases women. They work together, they give each other unbelievable grief. That was pretty mild, the stuff in the movies, the way they were hassling each other. And when you get Navy guys and Army guys and Air Force guys together, it really gets kind of wild. But you realize when those guys went in, they were flying in on Air Force Special Ops aircraft, C-130s, MC-130s. And then when those boats came in, they were being hauled under Army Special Ops MC-47s, MH-47s, excuse me, helicopters. All the services, particularly in SOF, work together all the time. A lot of people have said, well, you're Special Forces, you're a Green Beret. Were you jealous because the SEALs got to go in and get Bin Laden? No. I'm just really glad they got him. And, you know, every time one of those guys does one of those really hard jobs, all of us who've worn a uniform, there's a little just catch in the throat, and look, yeah, good job, guys. You did what you're supposed to do for this country. And we don't really care what it says after the U.S. on their uniform, whether it says U.S. Army, U.S. Navy, U.S. Marines, U.S. Air Force. It says U.S. And that's all that matters to us.
And again, just Dr. Bucci here, when he was in the military, at one point was the commander of the 3rd Battalion, 5th Special Forces, which he led deployments to Eastern Africa, South Asia, Persian Gulf, including Operation Desert Thunder, and also was a leader within the 82nd Airborne, as well as the 5th and 7th Special Forces. Now, you know, after your time in the military, you served also in the OSD, the military assistant to the Secretary of Defense. Could you talk a little bit about the role that Special Operations Forces SOF played in America's sort of larger national security toolkit, and maybe talk a little bit about the pressures or the role that they may be playing in the years to come?
SOF is the general term for it, by the way, Special Operations Forces. That covers all the services. Sorry if I get sticky about that, but we do it. When you say Special Forces, you mean Army Green Berets. They're not the same as the Rangers in the Army. They're not the same as the SEALs, which are in the Navy. They're not the same as the Air Force Special Operators. or aviators or the Army Special Operations aviators. We all get a little particular as to which ones. So if you're going to do it, use SOF, S-O-F. All right? Their role is very specialized. They've got a set of missions, and you saw several of them there. You saw direct action, where they go in and kill people and blow things up. You saw strategic reconnaissance, or special reconnaissance, where the guys were sitting there in Africa watching the aircraft. They do lots of different things. The SEALs generally do those things near the water, because they're really good at water stuff. All right? But they go way inland too, like to out of, how do you say it, out of Bottlebad, wherever they got that. So we have the different specialties, but it's specialties, all right? They're really good at what they do. They are really crappy at doing what they shouldn't be doing, all right? They don't do well fighting tanks. They're no good with those little bitty fast boats going against somebody else's really big boats, all right? We need a balance in our military. We need to have those special operators. It gives us capabilities and options as a government that other people don't have. But if you don't have those very capable, very talented, very hardworking general purpose forces, you don't get the opportunity to do the special stuff. There's always a danger because of the glamour and the excitement of special ops type missions that our leadership focus on those things too much and decide that's really what we need. And you know what? They're a lot cheaper than aircraft carriers and tanks and fighter planes. But I'll tell you what, if you take that cheap, glamorous route, the United States will not be prepared for the next conflict it has to deal with that even experts like my colleague, Dr. Carafano, can't really predict. Right? Nobody can. And that's the problem. You have to be ready for whatever cannot be predicted. And to do that, you've got to have a whole toolbox, of which special ops is one very, very important part, but one very small and important part. So when you see politicians and other people start leaning too much for that, you know, to put it in today's terms, the SEALs and the drones are not enough. I'm really glad we got them. And ours are better than anybody else's. But you need a lot more than that as well.
You know, our hope is that it'll be more of a conversation, and if any of the audience have questions, please, we have a couple folks on the side with microphones, and we'd love to get your opinions. I see a gentleman in the back raise their hand, and then a gentleman up front. So start in the back and then work our way up front.
And I'll answer, you can ask any question you want, even if you think it's classified. And if I can answer it, I will. If I can't, I'll tell you I can't answer it. Don't try and self-censor yourself.
Let me ask you a quick one that may be classified, and that is, can you give us a rough idea how many people are in special operations forces in general? But the real question I want to ask is this. Given that people in the military cannot criticize the president, and given that any fair reporting on the president's actions, some of it will put him in a good light, some of it will put him in a bad light, that is in violation of military policy. Given that, ought members of the armed forces be precluded from writing about their work, both while they're in the service and possibly afterwards?
Okay, first question is easy. I believe Special Ops Command has about 60,000, 70,000 people assigned to it. All right, sounds like a lot. It's not compared to the whole military, and a lot of those, not everybody in that number are trigger pullers. So there's a lot fewer of people that actually pull the trigger. So it is a pretty elite group. As to the second question, there is some debate right now going on as to what's appropriate and what's not. Clearly, when you are on active duty, you cannot publicly speak, and really you shouldn't even do it privately, against the president or any other member of the chain of command. It's against the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and if you choose to do it, you will accept some degree of punishment from that system. Same with anything classified. You know, this is Washington. Everybody seems to be very cavalier about passing around classified information. The military, one hopes, would not do that because it's a total violation of the law. There is some debate, however, as to the freedom that someone has once they leave the military, once they retire or once they resign from their service. Clearly, in my opinion, you're still prohibited from passing on classified information because you've signed non-disclosure statements. You have willingly accepted that those restrictions. As far as the criticism of the president, it's always interesting to me how it switches from side to side depending on who's the commentator. All right, there are a lot of people who thought it was just dandy when all the generals started criticizing. Most of them retired, some of them on active duty started criticizing the former Secretary of Defense and the former president. They thought, by gosh, they're doing their duty because they're bringing out the truth. Now, when people are criticizing this president, some of those same commentators are saying, oh my gosh, this is terrible, they should be prohibited from doing that. My opinion, you don't surrender your right to freedom of speech after you leave the military. While you're in the military, it's curtailed as far as your freedom to comment upon people in the chain of command. It's very explicit. Once you leave the military, I'm not a lawyer, but the way I understand it, we get our freedom of speech back again. So there, you should be capable of criticizing those people if you feel that. I mean, that's one of the reasons guys resign. If I was still on active duty, I couldn't criticize the chain of command. So I either keep my mouth shut and do what I'm told, or I can resign. And after I resign, I can then speak out against them. So no, I mean, like I say, I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think there's any restriction, nor do I think there should be a restriction on criticizing actions once you have left the military. The people who read it get to make their decision as to whether or not they want to believe it or not believe it.
Sir?
Yes, on my GPS, I have put in an intersection in Red House, Virginia. There's a road called Sheikh Jelani Road in Red House, Virginia. And Sheikh Jelani happens to be the man that Daniel Pearl was going to see in Pakistan. But as you probably know, Pearl was kidnapped and beheaded, so he didn't see Sheikh Jelani. But my understanding is that in 1989, Sheikh Jelani comes to New York, and he establishes a network of cells of Jamaat al-Fuqara. And in the U.S., it's headquartered in Hancock, New York, which is a small city about halfway between Binghamton and the Catskills. And Sheikh Jelani is based in Lahore, Pakistan. And they specialize in terrorism against East Indians. It's quite near the Indian border. And I'm wondering if he might be more of a high-value target than bin Laden. And if we were to go after him, I would think that India would probably cooperate with us, and Lahore is very close to Pakistan. And I tend to think that a lot of these shootings in this election season, there are a lot of these mass shootings, but I tend to think there are cells in this country right now where they take refuge. And I had heard that a special agent said that Muhammad and Lee Malvo had taken refuge in a Jamaat al-Fuqara cell in Georgia.
I don't have any particular classified information about that particular guy. The United States, despite what some people think in the world, is a little reluctant to go into friendly nations to chase people down unless we feel there's enough of a justification to do it, as we did with bin Laden. I'm not sure if the National Command Authority would choose to go after that particular sheikh or not. That would be something that would be decided at the highest levels. It isn't just the senior chief making a decision to send the boys in. That's the best answer I can give you. I mean, it's very possible. I can probably guarantee you that our brothers in the FBI are watching the people here very, very carefully, because if there's any sort of evidence that justifies it legally for them to check out those guys, they do, and they do it very, very well. And overseas, the FBI and the CIA are doing a pretty good job of keeping track of those folks too. Not perfectly, because it's really hard to watch guys who are trying to hide. But that's, well, I say that, it's true. we tend to think, well, my gosh, we got all these satellites and all this stuff. How did it take us 10 years to find bin Laden? If a guy's really trying to hide, it isn't that hard. It's difficult to ferret this stuff out. Sometimes we believe our own press as far as the movies and think it's as easy as it is, and you get it wrapped up in 98 minutes and the good guys win. It's harder than that. That's the best answer I can give you.
Thanks for your question. We have time for maybe 2 or 3 more of those. So, Michaela, feel free to throw some knuckleballs or curveballs, whatever you want.
I'd like to ask you, Steve, a question from a little bit different perspective. What can you do as a civilian, as a citizen, to support the work of these guys and make it easier for them in terms of awareness, other forms of support?
Particularly for these kind of guys, the special ops folks, the best thing you can do, this is a personal opinion, but you can pray for them because they're really doing some tough things. 2, there are a lot of organizations, the Special Operations Warrior Foundation, that support little kids like that kid was displaying, that where one of their parents has been killed doing special operations work. They provide scholarships for them. There's organizations like that that can really do minister to the families, to the folks that do this kind of work. And if you ever see one of them in a uniform and you see that funny either patch like this one or that big pin that they put on the coffin, go up and thank them, because those people have sacrificed an awful lot for this country. And I think if you do that, they'd be thrilled. Michaela, thanks for that question.
I think just to add, one foundation is, again, the Navy SEAL Foundation.
Yeah.
Navy SEALs Foundation. Just Google them. I believe it's Navy SEALs Foundation.org.
If you look for that stuff, there's a lot of really fine organizations out there that are doing exactly what you're looking for, that we as citizens should support and could support pretty darn easily. And it makes a difference.
I saw one here and then one there. That's the lady in the, please, we have a microphone.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I was wondering how, touching back on the intelligence agencies, how do you coordinate between the military and the intelligence agency, and who gets the final call at the end of the day? Who makes the call to go up into an operation, and how is it coordinated?
It used to be done not so well. As we know, there was the so-called stovepipes, or as we like to say in Washington, silos of excellence. Because everybody had their own turf, people didn't want to cooperate. There was some, well, if we tell them this stuff, they might use it and they'll get the credit. I won't say that's completely eliminated, but it's broken down quite a bit, particularly in the special ops community. There's a very, very tight relationship with the intelligence community because there's really a lot of overlap with what they do. I won't go into more details than that. There is a lot of overlap, and it is done very, very well. And to do the kind of stuff, like we've never done an operation like they did in Mexico, all right? Probably wouldn't with Mexico. Just because of sovereignty issues, and it's not a criticism, it's just a statement. But to do something like that, it would go all the way up to the President of the United States. He makes those calls. Now, the Secretary of Defense, when I worked in the front office, when we needed to do stuff, there were many times where the Secretary of Defense took the little packet and he went over and talked to the President and usually selected members of the National Security Council, not the whole thing. And they made a decision on whether something was a go or a no-go. And our leaders do make those decisions at the highest level. They do not defer incursions into other countries down. They may make a general decision, yeah, go ahead and do what you need to do, and then you do a couple of things. But these kind of one-offs like were depicted here, that's stuff that would go up to the highest level before it was decided.
And let's take 2 questions in a row just to get. So the gentleman with the microphone and right behind you.
Yes, thank you for being there. It's a great presentation. I have more of an operational question, I guess. So, how are you alluded to the fact that each soft element has its own specialty. So they're chosen based on that specialty, but how are SOC teams chosen generally?
For a specific mission, you mean?
For a specific mission?
Okay.
Well, let's take one more
Get the
question after
second
that,
question,
so-
and I'll try and answer them both.
I'll just say the big takeaway as I'm watching this movie, and I'll just basically, small comment to get you guys to reflect on it. What if those guys hadn't succeeded? Now I'm watching the movie, if they hadn't succeeded, look what was gonna happen. They were gonna hit San Francisco, they were gonna hit Houston. This is all being done very quietly. But what if they hadn't succeeded?
Okay. To the first question, you know, we have a Special Operations Command, commanded by Admiral Bill McRaven. Great guy, real American hero, very intellectual young man as a 03, 04 in the Navy. He wrote a really great history book on SOF. He owns the whole command, right? And he gets the mission from the president. Sometimes it goes to JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, and those are the most cutting-edge guys. Those are the guys who got bin Laden. They own SEAL Team 6 and Army's Special Operations Detachment Delta. It's really not called the Delta Force other than in the movie. And they look and say, what assets do we need to do this mission? And what are people doing? Because these guys are also doing day-to-day missions, and they're chasing bad guys all over the place. So they pick the most appropriate units and capabilities, and then the ones that are available and ready to go, perhaps rested, perhaps prepared. They also really don't do things like so much on the fly like they did here. You know, the first hit they do down in the village, there's not a lot of missions where you go in and say, well, who's there? I don't know. Probably a lot of them. They probably got a lot of guns. Okay, we're ready to go. We usually do a little more planning than that. In fact, some of it is ad nauseum planning, and the bin Laden hit was, I mean, that was something that was rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed. We use all of our incredible assets to get as much information on what's there and who's there and what the buildings look like. You know, whether the doors open in or open out, because that makes a difference on whether you're trying to kick them or not. There's a lot of those things that are pretty significant. So there's a lot of thought that goes into who does these kind of missions. And to the second question, what would have happened? A lot of Americans would have died. Now, fortunately for us so far, American authors and movie makers and things like that are usually like really, really imaginative, and more so than some of the bad guys so far. You know, to my knowledge, we haven't had anyone use some high Russian gel explosive with ceramic pellets in it to do suicide vests. You can bet somebody's probably trying to figure out how to do it right now. You know, the buildings, or the airplanes flying into the buildings, it's a Tom Clancy novel. They took out the Capitol building with a big airliner, decapitated the American government, and Jack Ryan got to be president. But it's, you know, it's very dangerous for us to assume that our enemies are not as smart as us, or as imaginative as us, or as flexible as us, because they are. They don't all have quite the economic and industrial capability we do, but there's a lot of bad guys out there with an awful lot between their ears, and they're really, really motivated to do what they want to do. And they're quite clever, and they're quite determined, and they will plan, and they will wait, and they will do what they need to do to try and accomplish it. The only thing that stops them from doing it is the intelligence community and the law enforcement community that in our country sometimes get a bad rap, but I got to tell you, they are some unbelievable people. You know, they're not Jason Bourne, but you don't need to be Jason Bourne. Most of it is just really, really hard nug work, we call it, where you stay down there and you keep digging and you put the pieces of the puzzle together until you find out who did it, and then you follow those rabbit trails until you find the bad guy. And they do. What are we, 51? There's been 51 terrorist incidents since 9/11, domestic focused terrorist incidents that we have stopped, that we know about. there may be more. That was done by intelligence, by law enforcement, in some cases, a lot of luck, you know, where the things didn't go off. But they're out there working at it. What would have happened if those guys had gotten through? There would have been a bunch of dead people in Las Vegas and San Diego and San Francisco, because that would have been a pretty terrible weapon. You know, there's other countries around the world who see that kind of stuff all the time. We've been pretty fortunate. You know, I won't say 9/11 we were fortunate. We lost more than 3,000 people. But we haven't really had a big problem since then, other than some of the smaller stuff. But again, it doesn't have to be spectacular. It doesn't have to be highly technical. It can just be one guy with a couple of guns. And that's very doable in the United States, because we do see it happen. It's not always, you know, jihadi kind of motivation. But I got to tell you, it's usually more than workplace violence.
Well, Dr. Stephen Bucci, thank you so much for